story of the lives of people that had to learn that God was in charge. Remember when Jonah said, I'll be your preacher, God, but I am not going to Nineveh. In fact, I'm just booked passage on a boat going the other direction. And God said, you want that? You see, Jonah wasn't very wise because he didn't realize God was in control, and the next thing you know, he's swallowed by a fish, and guess where he ends up? Yeah, fish spit him out right on the shores of Nineveh. It's important for us to see that God is in charge and God's will be done. We need to realize that he's in charge, and Solomon had to learn that in his life as well. He made some terrible mistakes. He was not perfect, but he learned that God was in charge. And I think a lot of times we just need to accept that. There are things that happen I wish wouldn't happen. There are bad things that happen to good people, and I want to tell God how I think things ought to be. And over again, I have to learn that if I'm going to be a wise person, I've got to accept the fact that God is in charge. And you need to do that as well if you would be a wise person. We need to quit being so resentful, so rebellious, and more accepting of the will of God in our life. Let's go on then to the last one that we'll cover today. We're out of time. Wisdom trusts God in all situations. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 14 talks about Solomon saying, I've known good times and I've known bad. I've known the happy and I've known the sad. And he points out in verse 14 that the thing that he had finally concluded was that God gives both kinds of days. When you're having a bad day, it's because God permitted it. When you're having a good day, it's because God is blessing you. But both kinds of days come from God. And I think we have a tendency, at least I have anyway, to blame the devil for when things are going bad and blame and give God the credit for the good days. And what Solomon suggests to us is that wisdom is to understand that even if the devil's behind it, God permits it. So if things are going wrong in your life, it's because God, for whatever reason and wisdom, is permitting it to happen. And so wisdom says, okay, when I'm having a bad day, what are you trying to teach me, God? And following Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 14, and I think the next couple of verses talk about that. That a wise person says, okay, if things didn't go well, if things didn't go the way I wanted them to, if I'm having a bad day, obviously God has permitted that. Now, what is he trying to teach me in that? I don't know about you, but I'm not very good at making that last connection in my life. When I'm having a bad day, it seems like, when you're late for work anyway, that's when the car won't start or something. You know what it's like to have a bad day. It's just like everything goes wrong in that day. It just seems like it piles on and on and on. And I don't handle that as well as I think I should for someone 58 years old. Perhaps you don't either. At our reunion, one of the things that we do, and I'm not sure it's always all that respectful for those that have passed on, but we spend some time talking about those who are no longer with us, and we talk about some of the things that point out both the good and bad characteristics, I guess, of those people who've gone on. And the story was repeated of my dad, who I get my temper, I guess, honestly, from my father. He most of the time, he was a very fine man, but there were times when he just, especially as he, in his younger years, as he was still struggling to control it, that he just let his temper get the best of him. And they were telling a story at our family reunion about the time that we had an old milk cow, and she was built like a tank. I mean, this was just a really, really big, muscular cow. And as you would be milking, and I remember milking this cow and having it happen, she would almost in slow motion pick up her foot and stick it right down in the milk, the bucket of milk. And it was so frustrating because they didn't have to throw away the milk, obviously, there's all kinds of dirt and stuff that get in it. And you'd clean the bucket, you'd get back, you'd just get a little bit of milk in there, and she would do it again. And it didn't matter, you'd see it start to happen, you'd try to get the bucket away, and she'd just get her foot over it, where you couldn't get the bucket out of the way, or you'd spill the milk, or she'd have her foot in it before you could. And you'd try to grab her foot sometimes, or leg, and stop it. She was just too big and powerful, she'd just grind down. It was just so frustrating. Well, this had happened like 3 or 4 times when my dad was trying to get enough milk built so we could have breakfast that morning. Finally, he had enough. He was just, his temper just got the best of him, and he grabbed, before he thought, he grabbed the pitchfork and he just jabbed her with the pitchfork, just like that. And the cow went right out to the barn. I remember that as a kid. Just tore the board, the studs, right everywhere. Big cow-shaped hole right in the back of the barn. We got quite a laugh out of it. And later on last night, as I was laying there getting ready to go to sleep, I was thinking, I'm not sure that was the best story to tell about someone who loved and who's passed on. But to his credit, he learned to control his temper as he got older. And the cow was fine. He had to call the vet, and they had to make sure there wasn't infection from the 4 holes. Unfortunately, he didn't stick it in very far, but he punctured her pretty good. And so she didn't end up lame, so I guess all's good that ends well. But he never fixed the hole in the barn. And that always puzzled my brother and I. In fact, he went out and bought an automatic water and set it right there in the hole in the barn so the cattle could drink from it if they were out in the field or inside the barn. Both sides could get up to drink from that water. And we never asked him why he never fixed it. I mean, here's this big cow-shaped hole in the back of our barn for years. I mean, decades. And I'm convinced of the fact that my dad never fixed that hole because he wanted to see that and remind himself that he hadn't handled a very frustrating day the right way. And I'm convinced that it was that hole that helped him eventually overcome his sudden temper. And every time he saw that hole in the barn, I think my dad went back in his mind and said, Lord, what are you trying to teach me from that frustrating? I mean, this cow could be very frustrating. I used to hit her with my fist. I mean, she just really was frustrating. He ended up with no milk, but just really, you've been in a battle. That didn't justify what he did. He'd probably go to jail today if that story got out. But the point to be made is, he needed a reminder. When you're having a bad day, when things aren't going well, what we need to do is to ask the Lord, to trust Him, that God permitted that situation. God created that cow to teach my dad patience. I'm convinced of that. And I don't know what's going on in your life, but I know that you probably have some bad days. And when you do, Ecclesiastes says if you're a wise person, in the midst of all that frustration, when you just want to, you just want to beat your head against the wall, you just want to slap the first person, you come across, you're just so frustrated. A wise person says, God, why did you permit me to have this day? And maybe the simple answer is He's trying to teach you to be more patient. Because we all know how uncomfortable it is to be around someone who blows up and can't control themselves. I grew up in a family like that. And it makes other people uncomfortable, and it's not a sign of a very strong person when you let things get to you.